Good job.
There we go.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Kirsten Johanna Allen. I am publisher and co-executive director at Torrey House Press, and I am here in Salt Lake City with Will Neville Rabin, who is executive editor and co-executive director with me. And we are so delighted to have you join us, whether you are a panelist, an author, or joining us as a supporter in the community. We're just thrilled to have you to discuss this fabulous book tonight, The Once and Future Lake, Stories for Great Salt Lake. We're going to be hearing some readings tonight that are just going to give us hope, warm our hearts, make us feel as though, not every day is a bleak and dry day. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that Will and I are joining this evening from the homelands of the Ute, Goshute, Shoshone, and Paiute nations. And I invite you to think about the Native people on whose land you live and get to know more about the history and the current residents who are a part of our communities wherever we are. Thank you to Torrey House Press members, to donors, to our authors, to all of you who are viewing tonight. Torrey House Press is a community endeavor. We're publishing books in the midst of flyover country, and we are making a difference, and we are reaching people because of people like you, supporters like you, joining us in the many ways that you do. Tonight, as I said, we're going to be hearing some readings from this fabulous book that has been put together by Michael McLean, the editor. I have had the pleasure of knowing Michael for many, many years, kind of since the beginning of Torrey House Press, back when my husband Mark and I started it in 2010. I bet we met with Michael in maybe even during that year when Michael was running the Center for the Book for Utah Humanities. And I've been a fan of his work ever since. He, of course, serves as a review editor for Sugar House Review, and he was a founding editor there, and also as a poetry editor for Dark Mountain. He's written so many poems that have been a part of so many anthologies, and he comes to us today from New Zealand, which is not suffering a drought right now. And I'm just really glad to bring together this community that Michael has developed for us tonight. I'm going to turn things over to Will for just a little bit to give you a sense of run of show and what to expect.
All right. Welcome again. Thank you so much for taking some time to be with us and to revel in the written word with all of these wonderful folks. Here's how this is going to go. Michael has put together a phenomenal array of writers of many kinds and many perspectives and different types of storytellers and advocates as part of this book. There is no way, well, there is a way that we could have theoretically had everyone read on a single night. It just would have been a marathon beyond what my 9.5-year-old would let me get away with. So we will be hearing from 18 or 20 folks this evening, which is just over half of the people who are represented in this book. So there are many other writers, some of whom are online with us tonight, and others who you will have the opportunity to hear from either in person or online in the future. And we very much look forward to that. So that we can fit in as many people as possible, I'm going to ask that each of the writers introduce yourself, tell us your name, and tell us the name of the piece that you will be reading from as you get going. We're, as you can tell, super pretentious here tonight, and so you should absolutely judge us if anything goes wrong. There will be no mics that need turning on. There will be no giggling. It will all be dour and absolutely not. With that, Kirsten has really honed in on the fact that writers should have the first and the last word at events like this. So we're going to kick off with a reading from Karen Anderson. I'm going to ask Michael a few questions, put him in the hot seat. We'll all learn a little bit about the book and the project and how it came together. And from that point on, we will be in the hands of some marvelous writers and a few interludes of conversation. with Michael and the various authors who have been a part of this phenomenal journey. So again, big thank you to everyone for being here. And Karen, please kick us off.
That's no stress. Thanks, you guys. Uh, can you hear me all right?
Again.
Yeah, okay. My name's Karen Anderson. This piece is called Abide. I think I get to read first because I'm writing about what it means to live among the lake. When I was 22, I worked as a recreation helper at a care center near my hometown. Dreaming up ways to while away long geriatric hours allowed me to be a humanities type in a medical setting. We made frosted cookies for family visits. We flew kites on the front lawn. We recorded personal narratives, which is how I learned that sin has always been rampant in American Fork, Utah. I had a hometown friend named Fred Foreman, a dirty old man who badgered my sister and me for kisses. A sexy one, none of that Sibby grandpa stuff. Fred had explained to me how to make hard mountain cider. Fill a wooden keg with pressed apple mash, load it onto a pack horse, carry it above the canyon intake, and set it in a stony hiding place. Go back up come spring with an auger and spigot, catch 200 proof alcohol in your canteen. Let the horse do the thinking on the way down, he advised. Fred and his saner brother, Roby, had played in a jazz quartet when they were young. They gigged church dances and makeshift nightclubs. I asked Fred if they could still make tunes. You betcha, he said. So I invited them to play for the folks at the care center. You got to give me a kiss for it, he said. I'll bet you come, even if I don't, I answered, and I was correct. They pulled up in a van, four old men in snazzy shirts and bolo ties. Fred uncased his tenor sax. Roby sat down to test the piano keys. The boys set up drums and plugged in a pearly F-hole guitar. Fred bellowed, "This for all you kids used to dance out to Saltaire." And Roby murmured, 1, 2, 3, 4. First measure of In the Mood shocked the room. Sleepy old folks sat up straight. Comatose droolers lifted their heads. Wanda Rivers stood up to shimmy like the flapper she must have been. Holden Malmstrom, past 100 and perfectly lucid, called out requests. There is a tavern in the town, Sweet Georgia Brown, when it's springtime in the Rockies. And the band answered, effortless. The room was transported to a place I'd never been. Joyful, but also overtaken by melancholy, each listener drawn into a timeless dimension. Wanda was crying uncontrollably. How will I ever tell my daddy? He'll kill us both. Fred was sweating, plumb wore out. Roby looked like he could jam on into the night. Aides wheeled delirious residents out toward dinner. The energy was haunting. Holden ambled over, suave. It's just we're all remembering nights at the Great Salt Lake, he explained. Salt air, all lit up like a sultan's palace. The dance floor had springs under it, so it gave a little under the rhythms, lifted when we all jumped together. My God, those were the days. I'd heard of salt air, seen pictures, but I'd never understood the communal passion. The old resort was by then burned down and defunct. The popular devotion to Great Salt Lake had dried up. We'd go out to the decks for a breather, sometimes to sip a little, well, you know, Holden went on. The stars were so bright out there above the islands. They reflected perfect in the water. Not so many lights in the city as now. We felt like the only people on the planet, just this one palace, sat on the lapping water. Us boys thought we were Kubla Khan. Anyway, that music brought it all back. Funny how time comes at you, ain't it?
Thank you. All right. So when Kirsten and I first started talking about the possibility of this anthology, she immediately said, I know exactly who needs to edit this. It's Michael McLean. I think he might have moved to New Zealand. Let's get on Zoom with him anyway. And when we did, um, he opened up and the video was there, and huge on the wall behind him was an enormous historical map of the Great Salt Lake. And we knew that we were in very, very good hands. So Michael, two questions for you, very related. One, can you just tell us a little bit about your history and your relationship with Great Salt Lake? And two, how did you get a map that big to New Zealand?
Uh, well, to answer the second question first, it was already framed and hanging in our house in Salt Lake, so it had to move already that size. It did not get rolled. I was amazed it made it here, to be honest. All in one piece, still beautiful. I wish it were original. It's a reprint of a map that I first found when I was working for Kent Sanders. It's one of the only ones that has warm springs and some of the old kind of pleasure palaces on there, the recreational heyday around the lake. So that's why I wanted that one in particular. And that actually kind of gets to your first question. My earliest memory of the lake is really more about the wetlands around it and the hot springs, the complex of hot springs that border the lake. My father was Union Pacific Railroad. He was a yard master, worked up in a tower about 5 stories up above the railroad lines there. And he would occasionally take me to work with him. My parents both worked multiple jobs, long hours. And I would be up in that tower and I could see out, this is the top end yard there on Beck Street, just off of Beck Street. And I could see out, steam coming out of the storm grates and off of the little bodies of water out around that area. And it would just seem like this kind of exotic, mysterious place. And I asked him to explain to me, what I was seeing. He told me about the hot springs and about his brother had polio when they were children and had been treated at Warm Springs. And so he told me about Gary, my uncle Gary, and his treatment there. And it just became the whole Beck Street area and all the kind of greater ecosystem there just became this incredibly magical, strange place to me. And many, many years later, when I was in the environmental humanities program at University of Utah, I was trying to decide what to do, kind of my final thesis on. And initially, I had planned to do an oral history of downwinders, only to find out that the wonderful Rob DeBerk had already started that exact project. And so I had to shift gears pretty quickly, and I was driving I-15 one night, and it happened to be a really, really cold, wintry night. And I could see all the steam coming up off the springs, and it was foggy, and that smell hit me again, and all those memories of that tower came rushing back. And those conversations with my dad, and I knew that was my project, was to focus on kind of that area of the city and what it meant to the larger ecosystem of the lake and what it meant to the cultural and industrial history of the city. And that's how I went down this weird, wonderful rabbit hole of the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah. You're in a place where I'm assuming people are not super familiar with Great Salt Lake. What's your favorite Great Salt Lake fact or historical tidbit to share when you're introducing folks to this bizarre ecosystem?
Oh boy. I'm actually surprised how many people here do visit the lake when they go through Salt Lake City. It seems like more tourists coming in internationally make more of a point to get out there than people living in Salt Lake or in the surrounding region. But I always like to talk about, because so many of these resorts and kind of that heyday that Karen talks about in her piece, which is why I wanted to start this reading with that. Yeah. So many of those things are gone now, and there's very little trace of them left. And so I like to talk about the dedicated pleasure line railroad that was out there that would take people from Garfield Beach and Black Rock around to Warm Springs and Beck's Hot Springs and then up to Lagoon. And it was purely for leisure. It was, all the stops on the line were to take people to recreational facilities. And, that's when love for the lake was really at its peak. It was the focal point of the valley. And I hope we can get back to, maybe not in the same form, but get back to that point at some point in the near future.
So when when you were thinking about putting together what are all of the voices and stories and perspectives and different kinds of ideas and contrasts that needed to help make that resurgence happen, and what would a literary piece of this look like? You know, there are so many people doing such great work, literary and otherwise, around the lake. As you're thinking of putting together an anthology that is additive to that already vibrant ecosystem, can you talk to us about what you were thinking and what were you looking for as you put together this fantastic crew of writers?
I mean, we have some pieces that deal with the lake generally in the book, which we need and are very useful. But in my initial invitation to most of the contributors, I wanted to know about their personal relationship with the lake on some level. Like, what what was it that connected them to it? And I think um, essays like Sarah Fox's come to mind immediately with these kind of strange stories that transpire with her and her partner out in the peripheries of the lake. And Joe Long's essay about the flies. Like, I think flies is something that a lot of people think about when they think about Great Salt Lake, but they're not flies as a nuisance. There's a love for them in this piece that is really remarkable. And it's little connections, it's really personal connections like that I was hoping to see a lot of, and did, absolutely did.
Right. Um, I could ask many more questions, none of which is as interesting as the work that these writers have done. So I think with that, I will stop there and step back and revel in the words to come. We'll turn it over to Danielle, and we've got six writers teed up, and then Michael, it'll be back over to you. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank, thank you. And thank you, Michael, again for this wonderful anthology. I'm Danielle Dabrowski. I live in Cedar City, Utah. And so I will be reading about that southernmost part of the lake. Cedar City is also settled. Some of the early people who moved to Cedar City are from Wales and Scotland, and I mentioned that as well, along with some of the indigenous people as well, the Paiutes. Along Old U.S. Route 91, the frontage road between Cedar City and Canaryville, a sign set up by the Utah State Commission marks Lake Bonneville's southern rim. It reads, "The low ridge of the south end of this valley forms the south rim of the Great Basin, which in prehistoric times was the bed of a vast body of water, now referred to as Lake Bonneville. Lying at the lowest part of the lake bed and having no outlet, Great Salt Lake became the Dead Sea of the Western Hemisphere." Maps show that this southernmost part of the lake was diverted from its main body into a long bay, covering what is now Milford and extending its shores beyond Old Irontown, an iron mine ghost town west of Cedar City. A Pleistocene freshwater lake once teeming with fish and reptiles, the Ice Age lake was as old as 30,000 years, covering 20,000 square miles over southern Idaho, eastern Nevada, and western Utah. I have lived in the south rim of the Great Basin for over 30 years, a transplant from the Piedmont Valley east of the Blue Ridge Mountains. When I first moved here, I carried images of the dogwood blossom as a talisman to remember my hometown. But after 3 decades, the desert has crept into my blood. My talisman has transformed from the ephemeral flower to the durable ammonite fossil. One September afternoon, to get a sense of that ancient lake and the fossil's original home, I drove west on State Route 56 over the Harmony Mountains toward Newcastle and Beryl Junction. The lake was shallow here, no dramatic shorelines follow the mountain's edge compared with the Wasatch Front. At the junction, I go north along Beryl Highway and pass a few houses until the road cuts a straight line for miles through sagebrush and sand, finally curving along the railroad tracks for the Union Pacific trains. A light dust ripples along the valley edge as if a bay laps the base of the mountains. They look like prehistoric reptiles warming themselves in the sun, their brown, jagged backbones descending into low ridges of leathery tails. I turn around before sunset and drive back east on 56, paying more attention to where the highway rises and dips. I drive over the summit toward home and marvel at the brilliant blue sky against red rock hills flanking Cedar City. Up to 60% of our body is made of water that contains the same amount of salt in relation to water as the ocean. We taste that salt in our tears. There are still similarities between fish and humans, the webbed skin between our thumb and fingers, our smooth belly fat. I became entranced with the idea that we are really land dolphins, curious, playful, social, but unlike our sea cousins, we have forgotten our original home, despite the fact that we carry its blueprint within ourselves. Within the blood of my fellow neighbors runs the River Taff or Loch Lomond, within mine, the Atlantic and the Shenandoah River. Like many of our northern counterparts, we are not indigenous, but interlopers, living under the misguided legacy of our predecessors, who didn't understand at what cost the desert would blossom as a rose. The pioneer descendants who have ranched much of the high desert now sell acres to developers. Rows of Great Salt Lake townhomes pave their way over a depleting aquifer. We don't know what will happen up north. I do know that at the southern rim of the Great Basin, we live in a ghost town of an inland sea. Our ancestral memory of abundant water won't change the fact that we are drinking dry what little was left behind, even as inside us all lies an ocean. And that is from Ancestral Waters.
Thanks, Danny. I'm Natalie Padilla Young, and I'm going to read my poem, The Monster Shrinks. The character is a monster that's lived in the Great Salt Lake for centuries. And so the idea is that he was living in, like Lake Bonneville, huge, and now it just is shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. Sounds around his home begin, build again. Some cameras, scientists, some curious locals. This collection of water is worth more than their parents claimed. Stinky, bug-infested cesspool of brine. The monster overhears concerns, shrugs a few new kinds of prayer. He never needed critical level speeches, felt how tight, his home cinching closer, quicker. Not surprised, but nervous, his big body might survive the inevitable reveal. Not so suddenly, without water. Well, that wouldn't work. Then something else starts. The monster feels more room to float, feels his home grow inch by inch, gather higher over his head. He studies the shoreline. Days to weeks, weeks to a new conclusion. The water is still receding, and so is he. Crystals, salt crust, the distance to the bottom, everything bigger. Ducks, seagulls, bigger between his teeth, harder to chew through, lonely and alone for so long. It feels nice. Each month, a little less mass to worry, lug about, cause ripples. The monster calculates. A few short years and then drift away. No more reflection. Smaller than the smallest sea monkey. How easy to disregard the facts of disappearance.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm Adam O. Davis, and in writing this poem here, I was thinking a lot about the idea of terroir. So it's a wine term, but the sense of how any people who exist upon a land are ultimately subject to the dirt and the water itself. And it's called Self-Portrait as Beehive. Then their lungs gave out. Their canary told a lie. Their livelihood became lore. Their blood, long cooped in the cells of themselves, begat copper until they, meddled with earth, grew rich, went forgotten, settled like knives in the ribs of that mountain. I was that mountain. I was that canary. I was that copper in the lung, that sagebrush in the blood, those clouds that hung and hummed like hives in the skies that men had built without safety equipment. I was the world as the world had been built, on loan from loam and leashed to that knowledge. No better than bee or bush or bullet in the breast of a man who wanted nothing other than to die. No better than anything that pushed from the dirt that drank his blood. and housed those dead men who did dead man things as I drove past the prison, past Provo, past Levan, Sevier River through Scipio into Cedar City, whose streets stood quiet as uranium in the summer dusk, and where no one dared ask what I meant by my being. I was all that the dirt had given me. Thank you.
Is it me?
Yes, Justin.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yes?
go for it. Yep.
All right. My name is Rob Carney. This is called Still Life with Birds. Everyone paying attention knows the West is in serious trouble. Australia, too. A whole planetary roll call of places. Wildfires, record heat waves, fill in the blank drought, mega, decades long, state of emergency, extreme. Any of those adjectives will do. And the heat, 100 million mussels baked right there and reeking in the tide pools. And inland isn't any better. No, each river, each body of water is setting new records for lowness every year. I'm not an ornithologist, but I still know how to ask. If moored boats are practically dry docked in their slips, then what does that mean for all the migratory birds depending on the wetlands? Picture it like this. You're trying to drive cross country, say from Phoenix to Billings to Seattle to Alaska, then back home, only you can't. Not really, because these geese have bulldozed every rest stop. And some egrets have blown up all the gas stations, and even the monarch butterflies are getting in on the action, raining down poison on the off ramp restaurants, then setting the next to last grocery store on fire. So, anyway, trouble. Last summer, up at the reservoir, there was a heron on the dock, its shape, all its movements, calligraphy. Two pelicans, a seagull, even cranes, or at least I think so. They were too far away from the boat to be sure, just a dozen white blurs along the shoreline. My son Quentin said, I guess I missed the cranes. I wish I'd seen them. Next time, I said, there'll be other days. I hope that's true. Thanks.
Thanks to Kirsten and Will, and especially to Michael for his careful shepherding of all of this. This is from the end of my essay, Naming Creatures. And it actually comprises two visits to Spiral Jetty, one in 2005 when the water was just low enough that you could really walk out the spiral, and then the other one in 2022. In 2005, before we all carried GPS in our pockets, I got hopelessly lost with my friends Guy and Jackie in the maze of deep-rutted, ill-mapped dirt roads meandering the north shore of the lake. Roads meant not to carry curious poets from highway to earthwork, but to get cattle and ranchers from one scant patch of forage to another. Finally, we saw a man in a cowboy hat leaning beside his horse, chest high, against the other side of a barbed wire fence. In 3 steps and the time it took to roll the window half down, the cowboy flowed up and over the fence and alighted on our side, the long fringes of his chaps billowing around him, no kidding, like clouds of myth. I don't tell you about him to stop your hearts as he stopped ours, though any of us might have climbed out to ask him for a 2-step. His flight becomes a reason to say yes when composer Elizabeth Corbello asks if I will write a poem about the lake for her to set. The cowboy stands or flies in my imagination as figure, sign of romance and Anthropocene. Water law being law out west, every drop is spoken for before it exists. Human use its only value. Siphoned off as snow melts and flows, it is allocated in use it or lose it shares for farmers and water parks and the profligate unmetered watering of lawns for desert blossoming like a rose. For generations, that cowboy's family has diverted water to grow alfalfa and beef, crops with heavy thirst. Like any man of his time or now behind it, he takes from the land what has been made his business to take, as before him it was his father's and grandfather's. In the dry summer of 2022, Elizabeth and I drive those washboard roads to see Spiral Jetty now spinning over a shimmering bed of salt. While we walked the labyrinth, a white helicopter circled, then landed on the lake bed, disgorging a woman also in white, impossibly pristine. She snapped photos while Elizabeth captured water sound from a puddle, then me reading at the heart of the spiral. I stepped off onto the lake bed and followed a single set of footprints to a sunburnt Windsor chair positioned on the salt mile, stretching between the sculpture and water. I sat looking over the spiral toward shore and bluff, ghostly helicopter, a view I couldn't have imagined 20 years ago. What consoles me? Geologic time. For Elizabeth, I read to the accompaniment of wings and, excuse me, my eyes just went cattywampus, of wings. Where are you? From brush, the lark still sings herself into being. I am right here, sings answer, and from cover the owl calls present, haunting, here. Wind lifts veils we almost see through, bird bodies evaporated to dust, salt metals, breathe or not. Each body for now a world remaking others, the dead winding into me, you, deep time, losing nothing. Around us, voices remind us we are and here. For now, we answer.
Beautiful, Catherine. Thank you for your words. My name is Asia Banus, and I come from a family of skiers who are kind of involved in the ski industry right from Utah's first inkling of a ski industry. And so my essay, The Silent Sibling, is hopefully a call to action for the mighty ski and snowboard industry that we have here, who often don't pay nearly enough attention to Great Salt Lake. To a skier or snowboarder living along the Wasatch Front, one of the most exciting phrases to hear during a winter storm is the lake effect. It's a phenomenon that works in the opposite direction of gravity and snowmelt, molecules of water lifted from the lake to the mountains. You'll hear the phrase passed around the snowbird tram during a storm as a predicted 12 inches of snow becomes 16 inches. The locals will whoop lake effect as they push themselves into the powder, praising the relationship between the lake and mountains that make the Wasatch so unique. Though I grew up on the shoreline of Lake Bonneville and spent my childhood imagining glaciers and icebergs, I never once, during my upbringing, walked along the shores of Great Salt Lake. The closest I ever came was when our airplanes would take off and land at the Salt Lake City International Airport, circling over wetlands and islands. For all of the countless hours I spent frolicking in the snow, I had never once dipped my toes into the water that those snowflakes ended their hydraulic journey in, their final resting place before escaping into the sky. Never once had I actually visited what gives the city I live in, Salt Lake City, its name. It was a sunny Saturday in October, during the 4th decade of my life, when I finally waded into Great Salt Lake and felt its cool grip around my ankles. At my feet, bird bones lay still in the salty shallows. The water stretched endlessly toward the horizon, blending with the cerulean sky. I sat in the sand next to a poet, Nan Seymour, who gestured at the mountains and said, "The slogan Life Elevated makes us, as a culture, believe that everything worth caring about is up at the higher elevations." She shifted her gaze to the birds wheeling over our heads, to the serene water at our side. We aren't taught to value the lowest point of the valley. I had spent my life loving the mountains, yet never Great Salt Lake, their silent sibling. For all the times I had praised lake effect, I had never praised the lake itself. My attention had always been on the mountains, on the snow, never on the lake. Never the feature that might define my home even more than the mountains. Never the feature that might hold the future to the snow I so cherish. Those winter recreationists who call in sick on powder days to drive up glacial canyons might not see the similarities they share with brine shrimp, avocets, or white pelicans, but there are plenty. The same water that sustains life in the marshlands of the lake is necessary for the survival of the snowpack into the future. It's the same water that is necessary for the survival of our health as a community in northern Utah. We are all downstream of Great Salt Lake. Thank you.
Michael, back over to you.
So are you asking another question?
All right. Sorry, Will, I seem to be missing a little piece of the itinerary here. Was this where I was supposed to read? Or
No, this
you and I
is
jumping in on some questions here?
this is interlude one for questions from you to your many, many writers. So
Okay, fantastic.
Yep.
So as you guys have already seen, we have a great diversity of voices coming in. There's over 36 contributors that were coming at this from a lot of different angles. And I'm really, I want to call attention to a couple of people who are on the call right now, but won't necessarily be sharing work with us today, but hopefully at events in the future. Charles Waugh, who contributed a great piece of flash fiction to the book. We've got Scott Morris here, who I think is he still on? Yeah, he's still here. Who contributed one of my favorite pieces about the last bison hunt on Antelope Island. Really, really important work about some historical events out on the island that kind of coincide with larger notions of imperialism and colonialism and issues of ecocide that have kind of paralleled the history of the lake. So really important work there. And also I think we lost a couple of people, unfortunately. Is Terry still on? Oh, Terry. Yes, she is still here. Terry Harmon, who is doing and continues to do amazing work about the Jordan River corridor between Utah Lake and Great Salt Lake. And really, really grateful for that essay, which we had hoped that was one thing I really hoped to see more of when we started putting this, the invites out there to writers was kind of the greater ecosystem. And, you heard a little bit from Danielle Dabrowski about kind of the southern terminus of Lake Bonneville, and Adam Davis's poem talks about the Jordan River and Sevier and some other stretches south of the lake, but really wanted something that focused on the Jordan River and that corridor. So really grateful to Terry for that work. And I did want to ask, I was hoping that Alyssa Quinn would be on today. I don't think she has made it yet. Yeah, I don't believe so. But since we have Charles here, I wonder if I can put you on the spot for just a moment. We had two fiction selections for the book. But I wanted to ask Charles about how the lake kind of functions how it functioned in fiction for him as a character. Because in both Alyssa's work and in Charles' work, it's very much a character in the work. And so I just wonder if Charles, if you can talk for just a minute about kind of the Great Salt Lake in fiction and how it operated as a character for you.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you again for including the work. By including Alyssa, by the way, Alyssa is amazingly accomplished in her own right, but she was also a student in an undergrad workshop with me years and years ago, and she now lives basically in my hometown. So we've traded hometowns, and we're both in the same volume. And I don't know, it just brings me such joy to have a story in a work alongside her, and so I'm just very, very happy about that. I can't say that I can really answer your question that way. I wasn't thinking as much of like how the lake functioned. I'd been thinking for quite a long time about how what the drying out of the lake would mean, largely for my neighbors who did, in my neighborhood it was is a mixed kind of income neighborhood, and so I was really thinking a lot about how there would probably be people who would be able to afford somebody to clean all this up for them. That every time their house got sprayed with arsenic, they would just have somebody else come and clean it up. And that really just like every other kind of environmental disaster, is the poor people who are the ones who really suffer. And so they're going to be the ones out trying to take care of these problems on their own. And so that was kind of like one of the main sort of impetuses for that story. I feel like the disappearance of the lake, especially for a place like Logan, where we're so far away and we're so far upstream from the lake, it's sometimes easy to forget that we even are connected in some ways. But for sure, everybody is going to understand up here how connected we are when we stop having snow for the ski season and when we start getting things blown in on us, which we routinely do. I mean, the part about the mud splattering across the house, like that already happens up here all the time. And I haven't lived anywhere else in the state, so I don't know if that's what you all are experiencing elsewhere too. But at least once a year, we're getting mud splattered all over our house with some big dust storm that kicks up and then rains the particulates down. And so that was kind of the main thing behind it. I realize I'm not really answering your question, Michael, but I do appreciate getting a chance to talk for a minute about the story, which was really a fun thing to write. I really appreciated the prompt from you to kind of think about what might a story look like about the lake.
Yeah, it was interesting to me that with both the works of fiction that we ended up getting for the book, um, there's a real inherent violence to both of them. Alyssa's in particular, and that kind of early history of white settlement around the lake is really at play in her work.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was that was one of the more difficult pieces for sure. And it
Mhm.
was interesting to me that fiction really was the genre that got at that the most, I think. For I don't know if Alyssa's book has found a home yet. It was a chapter from a larger novel. I'm hoping it finds a home soon. I haven't heard from her in a while, but
Yeah.
keep an eye out for that, folks. It's an incredible novel. I read an earlier version of it. I have not read the final, so I'm hoping it finds a home soon. Um, I want to come back to Asia for just a moment, if I can put you on the spot for just a minute, because you addressed something that I think is really important, and it comes up in a few pieces in this, but it's that the kind of shift that happens, and this happens kind of mid 20th century, from kind of water-based recreation in the valley to the mountains, and we get a real focus on skiing and mountain recreation that takes a lot of it takes a lot of the uses of the lake out. And also at the same time, we have a lot of industry sprouting up around the lake's periphery, and really gives them an excuse to kind of push this convenient forgetting of the lake and its larger ecosystem. And wondered if you can, I know you've written a lot about kind of the mountain recreation. I wonder if you can just touch on that for a minute and talk about that process and that shift.
Yeah, of course. And it kind of like up until the 1930s, which was probably right around that same time, um, skiing in America was more of a spectator sport where you had a lot of um, mostly Scandinavian immigrants coming over and they would participate in ski jumping and stuff like that. But it wasn't so much of like a participation sport. And right around probably that same time, skiing became more of a participation sport with the opening of Brighton ski area and Alta ski area and some of the other ski areas that started popping up. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that the ski industry is really lacking in its support and its awareness of Great Salt Lake. And we have such a unique watershed here in the Salt Lake Valley where we can literally see the top of the watershed. I can see the top of Lone Peak right now from my house covered in snow. And if I were to just walk up in my neighborhood a little bit further, I can literally see the bottom of the watershed, which is Great Salt Lake. And we think of the watershed as being, in most areas, the snow melts in the mountains, it funnels into the rivers, it goes down to a lake, to the ocean. But here in the Salt Lake Valley, it stops here. There's no exit from the Great Salt Lake. From this lake, the only exit is evaporation into the sky. Um, and though it seems like we're all upstream of the Great Salt Lake, we are actually all downstream of it because whatever happens there will then affect the top of the watershed, aka dust on snow. And so we have a really unique relationship between the mountains and snow and skiing and the lake. And I know I kind of went a little off base here. But yeah, I think that the ski industry has the power and the money and the potential to really make an impact on Great Salt Lake politics. And so hoping to connect the dots a little bit more there in my work.
That was actually a really great, concise answer. Thank you. It's fantastic. We're going to move into the second batch of readers here in just a second. Up first will be Paisley, which is a great segue because one of the first kind of industries around the lake, of course, was the railroad, and this work ties into her book West, which if you guys have not read West yet, go find West and read it. Very important to this history for all kinds of cultural reasons. The railroad was what first brought tourism to this area, really allowed Brigham Young and others to push for large scale tourism to kind of the springs and other areas around there. It was integral to the history of the lake. And of course, the cutoff that comes later is what bifurcates the lake and creates the what we see on the cover, that cover image there, those basically two different sides of the lake. So that's a nice segue into some of that history. So I'll leave it with you, Paisley.
Thank you. And thank you for including me in this anthology. And I'm going to read pretty quickly because my internet connection keeps going out. I'm not sure. And one of my dogs is probably going to tackle me at one point. Lake effect. Cyanophilia, a longing for snow. Sirens shatter through my windows, blue and red, the color of a headache. Frontogenesis, zones of air pressure and temperatures strengthening. An hour ago, I drove by the lake, waved past by police. I'm not telling you anything you can't find out yourself. I live close to what produces its own weather, warmth desalinated into crystals that melt the packed ice of our streets. We use 20,000 pounds of lake salt to clear them, scree and gravel. During storms, my neighborhood gets constantly patrolled. I guess I'll have to wait for snow, is the next to last thing James, my neighbor, said, manic, before the cop shot him. It has not snowed in weeks. Ski resorts make their own storms now, machines groaning out thin flurries, though metal cannot duplicate how lake water thickens the crystals, gives snow its body. Body is business. I'm not telling you anything, James told the cop, who wanted his name, before lunging at him with a plastic shovel. They used to call this lake Timpanogos, built the city beside it because mountains form a bowl that keeps all enemies out. Everyone thinks there's someplace safe. I visited James's house once, saw the dishes piled up, the thin-soled boots ringed along his carpet. 21 days, and the sky is dry. Salt trucks sigh down empty streets. It's only the white that keeps some people here, where snow is work, a shovel means business. Wait, sorry, am I not coming through? Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. James wanted to scrape his neighbor's snowless drive when the woman called the cops about a man peering in car. Sorry. Is this me? Is something?
Cut out for
No.
a second.
You are mostly coming through clear
Okay, I
and
apologize.
glorious. Yep. There was
Something kind of jumped through, and I was like, wait, I don't know what that is. Okay, I
yeah.
apologize.
You are
James
also
wanted
not
to
losing your
scrape
mind.
his neighbor's snowless drive when the woman. Okay. James wanted to scrape his neighbor's snowless drive when the woman called the cops about a man peering in car windows. Not even stone is immune to salt, which, mixed with sugar beet, produces a solution that corrodes vehicles, bridge decks, steel plates. Do you see snow here? The cop demanded. Symptoms of mania include obsessiveness, aggression, the sudden, inescapable belief a man can clear the world of snow. Herons fade into lake, white on white, slicked into the grain boundary where mist turns everything to scuffed opal. The cop wore a camera strapped to his chest. I watched from his body the last footage of James pacing back and forth, eyes like burn holes. Over the course of time, everything degrades. Even the lake is shrinking, endorheic. No water flows in or out. Do you see snow? James's hand trembles in the video. He pants, paces. For a moment, it looks like everything might be all right. Then the cop demands, again, his name. I am not telling you anything you don't already know. A hand, a shove, a shovel, the video gone white. There are not 1,000 words for it in any language. How it looks from above, a lake that's dead but shining, blue and white, and when the sun just hits it, red. The mind, made too permeable by its terrible particulates, cannot be policed. What other word for stain? What word for gone? There is a body and a color and a grid of streets swept of white. James wanted to be friends, he told me once, as I watched him scatter seed outside his house. Black and yellow and red, the color of buntings that migrate through the city each spring. I like the white ones best, James told me, and tossed some seed, and the birds rose up around him in a circle. Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Um, it's hard to follow, Paisley. I could use a few minutes, but I'm going to wade right in. My name is Sarah Fox. I'm an environmental historian, and I was really honored to have a chance to contribute to this incredible volume. I'm going to read a short excerpt from my essay, A Noise Like Thunder, Great Basin Experiments in Space and Time. And just to give you a little bit of context, Terry Tempest Williams' book Refuge was a really crucial text for me. I moved to Logan from the Pacific Northwest for graduate school in 2004. I was very much a Pacific Northwesterner, accustomed to landscapes that were governed by tides, and I was really unsettled by this giant body of salt water that didn't have tides. But Terry Tempest Williams' book really helped me ground in that space, and it ended up being the spark that led to my research on nuclear testing in Nevada, and the uranium industry and their impacts on downwind and downstream communities. And while I was living in Logan, I fell in love with someone back in the Pacific Northwest, and he came to visit in Logan. And one day I said, "You should read this." And I handed him Refuge. I said, "I'm going to go work on campus for a while." I came home, he'd read the whole book, and he said, "We need to do a pilgrimage, a Terry Tempest Williams pilgrimage." And so my essay is the story of that road trip. Um, we drove out to the refuge as the sun was setting. I still have a photo from that trip hanging above my desk, which was over 20 years ago now. It had a huge impact on me. Once the sun went down, we also, like Catherine, got hopelessly lost in the days before GPS and ended up camping in what we thought was the Sun Tunnel's trailhead, but what was actually in the light of day, more likely a meth lab. So we were chased away by a naked man with a rifle, and we eventually arrived at the Sun Tunnels. So that's where I'm going to start my reading. Holt built the installation in 1976, intending, she said, to bring the vast space of the desert back to human scale. In this, she succeeded, certainly. After our disorienting misadventure, we now had a reference point of some solidity, a human-scale landmark from which to contemplate the ageless practice of mapping stories onto the stars. We were only a short distance from the Nevada border, perhaps 300 miles northeast of the Nevada test site, where I knew that from 1951 to 1962, approximately 100 full-scale nuclear weapons had been dropped out of airplanes, shot out of cannons, detonated atop towers, and attached to weather balloons. The force of these explosions sucked up the materials of the desert floor, materials not so different from the dried lake bed we stood upon now. Prevailing winds carried these materials east most of the time. Cognizant of the potential of human health impacts from radiation exposure, the Atomic Energy Commission dictated these tests only take place when the wind was blowing east, away from densely populated California and over the Great Basin and Great Salt Lake. In the face of this kind of history, the silent vigil of Holt's Sun Tunnels felt poignant. A refusal to disavow this landscape, as so many others in positions of power have. After our visit to the Sun Tunnels, we made our way east through the ghost towns along the Transcontinental Railroad line north of the lake, through the bird refuge, and back to Logan. In the end, I reflected, places like Great Salt Lake teach us about loss, entanglement, and love. They show us the gaps in our own knowledge about place, power, and the past, and the places where we must make kinship and common cause if we are to head off worse disasters. My time as a Pacific Northwesterner living in the Great Basin taught me volumes about the power of grief and love to fuel social movements and the capacity of ordinary people to make sense of what is happening around them and in their own bodies. These, in the end, are the scales with which we are most equipped to make sense of the world, to choose a future where the sound like thunder is not bombs, but thousands of birds, reminding us of what poet Mary Oliver called our place in the family of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. I've made my home on the Nevada-Utah border for the past 27 years, and being able to hear talk about Nevada and that aspect of the Great Salt Lake's influence over the landscape, it really hits home. My poem is Driving Across the Salt Flats While Listening to Homer's Odyssey. A full Utah moon, yellow, fattened, rises behind me in the last moments of day before dusk is erased. Slowly it sheds its onion skin, becomes a worn silver dollar as it slides parallel, hovers over this ancient basin, silver light reflecting salt, salt reflecting back. Beneath the black, sagebrush rooted in the alkaline flats sway like sea anemone, waiting for the tides. Millennia have passed since water graced this small pocket of earth, but at night a person can become lost within the depths of this wine-dark sea. Only headlights and the constant mirror of the moon show the way. Thank you.
My name's Dana Patterson. Grateful to be here. Thank you, Michael, for the invitation to submit something. Um, uh, I am from Logan. Originally, Sarah, it sounds like we've swapped places. I'm in the Pacific Northwest now and really love it, but I visit home every year. And this is my poem, Our Lady of Great Salt Lake, which borrows from the Catholic Our Lady tradition. Our Lady of Great Salt Lake. The lake is a mother who won't say no, a vessel veined, woven, webbed with blue thread. She unravels till she's a barren bowl. She knows the names of all the birds who home to her shores: cinnamon teal, avocet, phalarope, pelican. She won't say no, unspooling skein from sky, pooling creek flow into the refuge of her turquoise bed. We shallow her blue till barren, her bowl, saline shroud, dust nimbus, brine fly halo. See her ghosting islands, her spiral tread. The lake is a mother who won't say no, except in arsenic sky, in dwindling snow, in mercury lung, in silent spring. Dread is our garment, how to mend her parched bowl. For her, for the birds, we'll learn to say no, feed her streams, swell her seams, a watershed gathered to her mending. Our mother, we know she aches to brim, unbrine, to stitch herself whole. Her devotion, old pattern, a giving bowl. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, everyone. I'm Star Coolbrook. I was born and raised on the Bear River. The Bear River is my focus when I think about the Great Salt Lake. And this is my poem to the bear. Walking the bear. I walk on water, take the river from its high Uintas down Utah's Cascades, wander Wyoming's meanders, Montpelier's meadows, to Soda's hairpin curve, where 30,000 years ago lava turned the bear away from Blackfoot's snake and sent it down to grace. Doubling back from Gem Valley to Cache, I walk the river's cobbled bed where tributaries surge, Rowdy Cub, Little Bear, Beaver-headed Logan, six-tined fork of Blacksmith. Down the length of floodplains I pass, through wetlands of cattails and bulrushes, to bottomlands leveled and drained, where river silts in, slows down, its honeyed pace tamed for grain. On the river's gliding current, I travel miles, each step a dreamlike passage through cedar and cottonwood, hawthorn and chokecherry, lifting like a heron over dams and sluggish lakes that halt the river's breath. I walk the bear all summer as it builds strength again, widens into marshes, joins in lush bird-heavy congress with the great, peculiar salt, a lake that would surely die if not for this river, this path, this milk and honey.
Thank you, Star. That was awesome. Good to see you again, too. I love the Bear River. I love that area. I'm always up there. Sometime I need to come visit you. I'm going to read from the brine flies essay that Michael mentioned called Brine Flies in the Dark Instead. And this, I'm going to read the end of it so you can get, I think, a little glimmer of hope. I lifted one microbialite shard. It felt like a long crust of bread, breaking, and found its bottom littered with dark segmented pupa. Brine fly cocoons where that crazy magic metamorphosis occurs in a week or so. The audience never sees this brave trickery. Plump white larvae inside the chiseled pupa, crafted by the larva, or in metamorphosis to full-grown flies with all their machined parts. Within days inside the pupa, larvae grow legs. They grow wings, all those cells in the larva with their genetic design for the full body of the fly, head, thorax, abdomen, which in days after the fly hatches will be capable of making eggs and sperm to fertilize the eggs in the ovum. The return, you see, the cycle of change. When the flies emerge from the shell of the pupa, they have formed a bubble of air that surrounds the newly formed body, the supply that floats them to the surface of the lake. The adult flies, in their few days, can return underwater by forming a new bubble of air. I call it the magic bubble, diving bell, old gentleman, scuba suit. In the bubble, the flies crawl down the microbial-like terrace underwater and feed on algae and diatoms. Enough oxygen in their gear for a 15-second dive. When they surface, this bubble, this safety suit pops, leaving the flies perfectly dry and groomed, ready for their close-up along with the 37 million on this mile of shore. And I skip a section. You'll have to find out what that is when you get the book. I retrace the exercise backwards. Brine flies receding into the dark room. The gulls, the grebes, the golden eyes, the phalaropes, following the flies into dark, into that silence as the lake recedes, as the lake gets saltier and diminishes. I do not know what is left when I turn on the lights and see the faces of my young students, a pile of wings in my hand. But in the dark, I forget freshwater springs. I forget watersheds, Lee's Creek and its delta, water mixing with waters of the lake, a cocktail of salt and fresh water mixed just right. Springs near Black Rock, where Garfield Beach used to be, hold water that seeps past dried microbialites in white mounds, seeps toward the living microbialites near the receding waters, far from Black Rock, water filling the channels. At these liminal spaces where fresh water meets the elevated brine of the lake, refuge habitats persist. Salt finds balance with fresh water. Here, thanks to osmoregulation, brine flies will balance their interior salt with the salt around them. This acrobatic act is not too much in the refuge. It is not too much to keep the brine flies living. The flies will find acceptable salt levels for algae, diatoms, and other food they need to live, even to thrive. These freshwater inlets build little arcs in the flood of drought and salt. The arcs will carry a flurry of brine flies to another time. Let it be soon, when we find wisdom to allow the water to return to the lake and swell its shores again. Then the flies will return to the shores. They will surround the Great Salt Lake with the sizzle of their living. 10 million birds will find them.
Thank you, Joel.
Thanks.
All right, I am back with a brief housekeeping announcement. So in the spirit of pretending to stay on time, we're going to continue with readings. I'm going to turn it over to Nan Seymour next. And then we should be wrapping up right as scheduled around 8:30, but for anyone who is interested in sticking around for another five or so minutes, we'll have a little bit more conversation with Michael and the various writers at that point. But we will put readings first as they should be. And with that, Nan, over to you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm Nan Seymour, as said. Thank you, Joel, the sizzle of their living. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for giving the lake your attention tonight. This story is called Lake Woman Leaving. It's after the Inuit legend of Fox Woman. Once upon a time, there was an angler who lived all alone in a small cabin at the top of a canyon in a high mountain range. They tended a simple garden, and speckled trout were abundant in the river nearby. The angler did not often go hungry, but sometimes they were lonely. One early summer evening, the angler returned from a long day on the river to find a fire already lit in the hearth. They looked around, saw no one. Had they left the morning's fire unattended? No matter. They cooked the trout they had caught, and each bite was more delicious than the last. The next morning, they set out for another day on the river, and once again, when they returned, there was a fire in the hearth. This time, a savory fish and potato stew simmered in the cauldron. Upon tasting, they found it sublimely seasoned with just the right amount of salt. The next day, the angler left early, as usual. Instead of heading to the river, they quietly circled back, determined to learn the source of their recent comforts. Through the window, they saw the figure of a woman flowing about the room. They were astonished by her beauty, enchanted by the ever-changing colors of her tresses. As they marveled, shimmering pink became magenta, tumultuous green shifted into gradient shades of blue. Locks of slate gray alchemized into silver and then molten gold. Colors appeared that they did not know how to name. Yellow-bellied, blue-headed swallows circled the air above her head, an ever-singing crown. A vast cloak of gossamer and waves trailed behind her, receding and swelling like a tide. She smelled of petrichor, sailing waters, and microbial life. This was Lake Woman. Hesitantly, the angler opened the door and crossed over the threshold. Without words, the two stood across the room and drank each other in. The whole house trembled like a sky ready to release a hard rain. The trusses crackled like a storm cloud gathering lightning. For 3 days and nights, the two scarcely ate and barely slept. They thundered and stormed, they sighed and smiled and laughed and howled and loved. The full flower moon spilled through the window, their singular witness. It was as if the two had always been together. Days became weeks, and their lives grew playful and tender. The couple fell into a pleasant rhythm, fishing and weaving, strolling, cooking, and mending. In the evenings, they danced by lamplight. Every meal they shared was seasoned with just enough salt to make it sing. Wherever Lake Woman went, even in the house, she was followed by birds, and not only swallows, but also herons, eared grebes, avocets, prairie falcons, and snowy egrets. There was seemingly no end to the variety of birds she conspired with. On rare occasions, she went into town and the birds went along, and as she walked down the streets and into shops, people turned their backs and whispered. Lake Woman remained unperturbed. But the whispers of the villagers became rumors, which made their way back to the angler, who felt ashamed. As weeks became months, The angler began to notice that Lake Woman took up a great deal of space in their bed. And although she hung her wide cloak in the hall, the garment gave off a feckin' smell that troubled them. They began to be bothered by the birds, but they loved Lake Woman dearly and did not wish to complain. As the months went on, their judgments festered. They grew resentful, impatient. One morning on their way out of the door, they turned to face her. Your cloak, they said, that smell, they said, and all the space you take in the bed, feathers everywhere, the cacophony. Their words echoed the accusations of the villagers, and their voice was steeped in disdain. Lake Woman listened without speaking. If the angler had only paused to listen in return, they would have heard a terrible whisper, the faint sound of water receding. All day long, the angler brooded on the river and did not catch a single fish. When they returned, Lake Woman was gone. Every bird had departed with her. No one left to catch the light or stir the currents. The hearth was cold and empty. The tiny cabin felt cavernous. Only 2 traces of Lake Woman remained, the outline of a great body imprinted in the bed, and fine dust hanging in the air, ubiquitous. They cried out in the night, pleading for her to come back. Their pleas would go unanswered. They were too late, and it was not enough. The angler still lives alone at the top of the canyon, forever yearning for the sight of their beloved. To this day, they can be found peering down every path. Even now, they are wiping the dust from their brow, searching an empty sky for any sign. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nan. I'm always so moved by your love for the Great Salt Lake. I'm going to read a poem. My name is Rachel White, and I'm going to read a poem called Return of Water that was written for the Alfred Lambourne Arts Program, which is an annual celebration of Great Salt Lake put on by Friends of Great Salt Lake, and they are accepting submissions if you feel inspired until May 15th. So I hope you'll participate. Return of Water. Every city has its own light, and mine has Great Salt Lake. Like a mirror placed to peer around a corner, it brings back to me rays from the sun below the horizon, embers in magenta, smoldering purple above a burning rosy orange glow far away behind lavender mountains. Range after range, draped in beaded curtains of indigo rain that evaporate before they hit the ground. Ethereal virga in reflected radiance mysterious, the Great Basin version of northern lights. Semblance of some other more perfect plane, a realm beyond us, who have barely begun to understand the resonance of our existence. Perhaps if we return a part of what belongs to the land in thanks, start to recognize we live, as do all things alive, in relation, rain will return, replenish the reservoir of deep time, waters that connect us to the people of the past, millennia upon millennia of intercontinental migrations, like great rivers converging in the flyways of millions to this vestige of prehistoric lake, to ancient tracks across a marsh, microbialites, salt reefs that transform light, an ongoing miracle like the parable of loaves and fish, into masses of brine flies and shrimp that feed the famished birds who rest to keep flying on. Thank you. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Rachel, with stunning imagery. I'm Hannah Saltzman. I am going to read an abridged version of the start to my essay called Spiraling Toward Yes. 3 months after my son's birth, I took my Brooklynite cousin, Alana, to meet Great Salt Lake. We parked at a favorite spot that when I first visited almost 20 years ago was mere steps from the water, the artist Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty, a 1,500-foot-long counterclockwise corkscrew of rock that once spun into a vast inland sea. Alana and I climbed onto dry volcanic boulders under a fierce August sun. We squinted toward where water should be, but saw only sand and salt. The jetty coiled like a snakeskin and unfurled like a question mark. This day was to be my first full day away from my baby, a trial run before returning to my job as a pediatric resident physician when I'd resume 80-hour work weeks in the children's hospital. Alana, 8 months older and my lifelong soul sister, sensed my distress and hopped on a plane to help me remember a version of myself that did not involve wearing a baby Bjorn. She had one request as temperatures soared into triple digits: do something besides hike. Our car bumped along the gravel road up to the spiral jetty, breast pump balanced on my lap, milk sloshing out of plastic nipple cups. I wanted my cousin to witness this lake that, or perhaps who, is both a mother nurturing all beings in this valley and an existential threat to all she has nurtured. Alana had heard about Great Salt Lake earlier that summer when the New York Times described Utah's environmental nuclear bomb, an incendiary political phrase that reflects a dire truth: the threat of an unthinkable amount of potentially toxic dust turned airborne. When Alana read about the environmental nuclear bomb, she'd called me in a soft panic. I answered the phone while pushing my son's stroller along a tree-lined urban creek that offered shade in the June heat. Her questions: is it true? Is it as bad as it sounds? Are you going to move? I swallowed and looked down at my baby. Asleep, his eyes danced behind pale lids with their lacy lilac veins. His tiny nostrils fluttered in and out nearly as fast as a fit adult's heartbeat. I wondered whether my baby was, at that very moment, breathing invisible trails of lake dust. I don't know, I said into the phone. I slipped my finger into the depths of my son's sleeping fist. He squeezed back in that newborn reflex that is also a profound connection of body to body. Now, Alana and I were walking past the spiral jetty under a cloudless summer sky. Our sandals crunched on salt crystals sharp as shards of broken bone. The jetty became a dot in the distance. Still no water. Alana gave me a look. Here we were on our not hiking activity, trekking through salt fields under a blazing sun without a clear destination, our Nalgene's already empty. Then, suddenly, we saw it. Water. Water turned pink by algae and bacteria, water all the way to the horizon. A pink lake in the middle of mountains, Alana said, her mouth parted in wonder. Is this a fairy tale? I squeezed her hand and pulled us forward into the cherry blossom water. Foam of salt and air swirled up our calves. When the water reached our thighs, we lay back and floated, held by each other's hands in some of the saltiest water on earth, held by the hope that this lake, again, will rise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That was gorgeous. I believe I am reading next. There's two poems in the collection, but I'm gonna read one that's called Guzzle for the Great Salt Lake, because I wanna call into the room Mayton Bimbu Perry and Darren Perry, who are both incredible advocates for the lake. And this poem is inspired by them. After a Shoshone hunter brought down a great kill, he called his village to give the feast to the bellies of his brothers. You should have stored it for your family, a mountain man chided, as if we could cheat the bellies of our brothers. The mountain man was confused when the hunter responded, I stored the meat in the belly of my brother. The heavens gave us snow, mountains gave us a river, the river gave us life sweet for the bellies of our brothers. If the heavens, the mountains, and rivers did not give so freely, no blood would beat in the belly of my brother. From gull to microbial, all are whole through the lake. For millennia, life was replete in the belly of our mother. It is more than enough if we only take what we need. There is no need to compete in the belly of our mother. With women as with nature, they delight in what they can take. That is the way they treat the bellies of their mother. From the red rock to the great and spacious building on the hill, our destinies meet in the belly of our mother. We share this feast with the grebes nestled in her hair. Both bird and man have seats in the belly of our mother. We share this feast with the bison thundering down the ridge. We both stamped our feet down the belly of our mother. When our lives are at stake and the lake calls our name, know we will always find peace in the belly of our mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your words, for your work, for your reading. And Michael, we'll have some bonus chat to come after we hear from Lisa Bickmore. But any closing thoughts as we send people off into the salty night?
Yeah, just a couple quick things. I just want to thank everybody for being here. It's so amazing to see all your faces and hear all this work. It's been such an abstraction for 3 years now, and even though I think I'm the only one who doesn't have the physical book at this point because I'm 8,000 miles away and it's somewhere over the Pacific right now.
We're working on it.
They're on their way.
This makes it feel tangible. Thank you for that. This has been fantastic. And also, I just want to say that there's so many amazing people doing amazing work about the lake. Obviously, we couldn't include everybody, and we couldn't do visual arts. Aside from the cover, there's not a lot of the visual arts included here. And I mean, Joel Long's photos of the lake are amazing. If you haven't seen them, go find them. He is doing incredible work. And there's lots of filmmakers and painters and all kinds of people doing amazing work that go beyond the literary arts. So just go out, support them, find them, help them make that work possible. The Friends of the Great Salt Lake have been, I noticed that Holly is present right now. Thank you, Holly and Friends of the Great Salt Lake for all the work you do. And Nan for your tireless work. There's so many great partners in this that have been a voice for Great Salt Lake for so long now. When the conversation has really ramped up in the last few years, but people were putting in so much effort before then. So thank you for that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't note that we lost one of our contributors last month. Alex Caldiero passed away, and that was a big loss. And he kind of represented in poet form the weird kind of liminal space that the lake offers to us in a more tangible form. And he was a friend, and I miss him. And I know he's out there somewhere, in his own words, where the sound goes after the bell stops ringing. So just a thought for Alex.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again to everyone. Here's to all of you. Here's to all the work and all the many words to come. And here's to art and to community and to saving a lake that needs us in this moment. Although we need this lake now and far, far, far into the future. I look forward to doing this work with each and every one of you, and it's an honor to have been a part of bringing this book into the world. So here's to all of you. Here's to Alex. Here's to the lake. Michael, thank you. And we will ask Lisa Bickmore to read us into a close. Thanks so much.
As I said to Michael before we started, I feel like he had to chase me and make me give him this poem. And I so am grateful to him for inviting me. And I just want to say, to offer my gratitude to all the writers tonight, who are the people who teach me how to love the lake. In human time, not dimensional and not, in my mind, spacious. For so long, the lake was a blank with only a book full of floating Mormons to fill it, meaning it was a lacuna. News to me, its population of flies and microfauna. Although a man I knew once had a boat, was a brine shrimp fisherman who fancied himself a captain, fancied himself rough and ready, and more than that, raised Mormon but an emphatic renouncer. A good captain always shares the catch with his crew, he told me, as if naming a foundational ethic of the lake. The lake was fuller then, I think, perhaps stretching our capacity for understanding. For a century or more, enough of us took water as a right, refusing to know that water taken as a right eventually punishes. In the last 3 years, we've gone twice, and each time it felt more like a dream, pink and foamy at the recessive shore, from which my husband picked up armfuls of foam, shore bloom, knee-high, barely wet, but surely salty. Years before, along the eastern shore of another inland sea, the Salton, its diffuse horizons miraging as we stopped to look across. The towns we drove through, someone's idea of future resorts ending in hardpan failure. And still someone's live there, somewhere beside in the houses taken down to the studs. Abandon hope all ye who enter, scrawled in spray paint by a literalist on one wall, buried alive on another. At the south end, a wild bird refuge at dusk, numberless water birds aloft, the sun burning to its conclusion. At that shore, we saw dead birds too, and dead fish, despite its refuge, the sea shrinking and toxic. I don't want to say harbinger. When we went to the Salt Lake the first time, of course, we went to see the jetty. As we drove, the signs both indicated and confused. It glittered. All of it. A dead long-necked bird curved into a half-heart, diamantine in salt. Is this a story that will help? That first time was 3 weeks before my father died. The second, 3 months after my sister. The spiral like a tattoo, a spiral like time unfurling, not geologic time because it is human scale, made by a man with earth movers and ideas. Human scale and therefore containing the seed of loss. Longer than a single life, though, intended to be that, intended to undo very slowly, be undone only by erosion, by waves and time itself. And in that, like the lake, also made by the earth moving, by ancient waters changes. The next time I am there, I want to be there when it rains, to watch snow melt into its salt. I want to mark no further anniversaries. I want to witness water having its own way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, good night. And if you want to stick around for 5 or 10 minutes for the after party, feel free. This is a phenomenal group of writers who don't get to see each other nearly often enough, and many of whom who have not been able to actually meet before, and folks are certainly welcome to stick around as well. So
thank you.
Thank you. With that, we end the recording and we go into overtime.